Tulsi Gabbard had been slowly gaining momentum in the political world. Her sharp critiques of the establishment, her calm but forceful demeanor, and her staunch independence made her a force to be reckoned with. But no one could have predicted what was about to happen, not even her. It all started on a late-night talk show. Tulsi was a guest, discussing her recent plans for 2024, when Hillary Clinton appeared in the audience, looking calm but slightly smug. The host, who had been hoping for a dramatic encounter, seized the opportunity. "So, Tulsi," the host asked, "what do you think of Hillary Clinton's legacy, and would you be interested in working with her if she ran for office again?" The room fell silent. Tulsi smiled, but there was a fire in her eyes that no one had seen before. "I think Hillary Clinton's legacy speaks for itself," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm not interested in working with her. The American people deserve a fresh start. We can't keep going back to the same old faces, the same old policies. It's time for real change." The room erupted in applause, but Hillary, sitting in the back, visibly stiffened. This wasn't what she had expected. The next day, the headlines hit like a freight train. "Tulsi Gabbard just crushed Hillary Clinton, it's the end of the line." News outlets scrambled to cover the fallout from this unexpected confrontation. It was clear, Tulsi had just thrown down the gauntlet, and Hillary's carefully crafted public image was about to face a storm unlike any before. But that was only the beginning. Behind closed doors, the tension between them was building. Hillary wasn't one to back down easily, but Tulsi's quiet, calculated moves were starting to make her nervous. She could feel the political tides shifting, and not in her favor. Hillary Clinton wasn't the type of woman to let an insult, no matter how subtle, slide. Her reputation, built over decades, was her shield, and she wasn't about to let a rising political star like Tulsi Gabbard topple it with a single remark. The backlash was swift. Within hours of Tulsi's appearance on the talk show, Hillary's allies were mobilizing. The Clinton camp launched an aggressive media campaign, calling Tulsi's comments reckless and disrespectful to the legacy of one of America's most prominent political families. Hillary, however, remained publicly calm. She gave a speech at a fundraiser in New York, where she subtly took aim at Tulsi. "We don't need divisive rhetoric in our politics," Hillary said, her voice smooth and measured. "What we need is unity, experience, and the kind of leadership that has been tested in the most difficult moments." The audience, packed with Democratic elites, erupted into applause, but Tulsi wasn't backing down. She saw Hillary's attempt to paint her as an outsider, a threat to the unity of the party, and decided it was time to respond. The next day, Tulsi took to social media, releasing a viral video that would make her critics question their own judgment. Sitting in front of a simple backdrop, she spoke directly into the camera. "For too long, we've been told that our only choices are between the old guard and the same tired policies. Hillary Clinton has been part of that system for decades. She represents a world that doesn't work for the American people anymore. You can't just give a speech and pretend that solves everything. We need bold, real change, not more of the same." The video immediately went viral, garnering millions of views and thousands of retweets. The response from her followers was overwhelmingly positive. Her calm but forceful rhetoric had hit a nerve. It was clear, Tulsi wasn't just another political figure, she was the voice of a new generation of voters, frustrated with the status quo. Meanwhile, Hillary's camp scrambled to respond. But with every passing day, it became increasingly apparent that the old tactics were no longer enough. Tulsi had already carved a path, and the people were following. As Tulsi gained more traction, Hillary's position seemed more vulnerable than ever. In private, her closest advisors began to ask the question on everyone's mind: was this the end of the line for Hillary Clinton? The media buzz surrounding the battle between Tulsi Gabbard and Hillary Clinton reached a fever pitch. Everywhere you looked, the headlines were screaming about the rising star and the end of an era. Tulsi's message resonated with a vast swath of voters who were fed up with the establishment, and Hillary, despite her decades of experience, couldn't shake the sense that her time had passed. Behind closed doors, Hillary's team was in full damage control mode. Strategy meetings were held in darkened rooms with a sense of urgency that hadn't been felt in years. They discussed how to handle Tulsi's growing influence, but every suggestion fell short. The media was no longer taking Hillary's word at face value. Her attacks on Tulsi came off as defensive and outdated. The Democratic establishment could no longer count on the same old tactics to maintain its hold. But Tulsi's momentum was undeniable. She held rallies in small towns and large cities alike, drawing thousands of passionate supporters, many of whom had never felt connected to mainstream politics. Tulsi was now a symbol of rebellion, a beacon for those who longed for a departure from the political elite. The tension finally boiled over when both women were invited to speak at the same Democratic fundraiser in Washington, D.C. It was a spectacle that would decide who truly held the future of the party. The night of the event arrived, and the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The venue was packed with high-profile politicians, lobbyists, and media figures. The moment Tulsi stepped on stage, the crowd erupted into applause. Her composed, no-nonsense demeanor commanded the room. She knew that tonight wasn't just about her message, it was about standing up to the political machine that had reigned for too long. Then, Hillary Clinton took the stage. The audience cheered politely, but the energy in the room had shifted. Hillary's words felt disconnected, her tone rehearsed, as if she were speaking to a crowd that had heard it all before. As she spoke of unity, of experience, and of the need to preserve the legacy of the party, there was an underlying sense of resistance. The crowd wasn't just passive, they were tired of hearing the same promises, the same speeches, year after year. When Hillary finished her remarks, the applause was lukewarm at best. Tulsi's moment had come. With a calm but determined smile, Tulsi took the microphone. The room fell silent. "You know, it's easy to talk about legacy when you've been at the top for so long," she began, her voice steady and strong. "But the American people are no longer interested in old promises from politicians who think they know what's best for us. They want something real. They want a government that works for them, not against them." Her words hit like a hammer. The crowd was spellbound. No one had ever dared speak so directly to the political elites before. And then, she dropped the bombshell. "Let's be clear," Tulsi continued, her voice unwavering. "Hillary Clinton's time has passed. She's had her shot. And if the Democratic Party continues to embrace the same tired, failed leaders, we will lose again. It's time for a new vision. It's time for a new generation." The crowd went wild. The applause was deafening, and for the first time in years, Hillary Clinton looked genuinely rattled. Her face tightened as the cheers for Tulsi echoed through the hall. The next morning, the headlines said it all: "Tulsi Gabbard just crushed Hillary Clinton, it's the end of the line." The old guard of American politics was in its death throes, and Tulsi was the one delivering the final blow. The fallout from Tulsi's devastating speech rippled through the political landscape, leaving the Clinton camp in a state of disarray. The Democratic Party, once dominated by Hillary's influence, was now facing a crisis of leadership. The public's perception of Hillary had shifted dramatically. She was no longer seen as the inevitable candidate, the seasoned politician who had earned her place at the top. Now, she was viewed as the embodiment of everything wrong with the establishment: out of touch, unwilling to change, and more interested in protecting her legacy than addressing the real needs of the people. The days following the fundraiser were filled with a sense of urgency. Hillary's campaign advisors, once certain of her dominance, were scrambling to devise a response. But no matter how they framed it, nothing seemed to work. The media pounced on Hillary's defensive posture, and the critiques of her leadership grew louder. Tulsi, meanwhile, was basking in the glow of victory. She appeared on news programs, interviews, and podcasts, her confidence growing with each passing day. Everywhere she went, crowds gathered. Her message of reform, of a government that served the people instead of special interests, resonated deeply. Tulsi had become more than just a politician, she had become a symbol of revolution. But Hillary wasn't done. Behind closed doors, she was making one final push. In a rare press conference, Hillary addressed the nation, attempting to reclaim control of the narrative. With a calm but steely demeanor, she spoke about her years of service to the country, her role in shaping policies, and her unwavering commitment to the American people. But beneath the surface, there was a sense of desperation in her words. "We can't afford to let divisive figures like Tulsi Gabbard tear apart everything we've worked for," Hillary declared, her voice carrying a sharp edge. "The future of our country is too important to be left to inexperienced, reckless individuals who think they can change the world with a few catchy slogans." But her words had lost their power. The contrast between Hillary's establishment rhetoric and Tulsi's vision of radical change was too stark. The American public was no longer interested in the same old promises. The message was clear: Tulsi was the future, and Hillary was the past. As the weeks went by, Tulsi's popularity soared. She continued to draw larger crowds, and her campaign gained momentum in states that had previously been considered Hillary's strongholds. The Democratic Party, once divided over who should lead, was now facing a decisive moment. Tulsi had positioned herself as the candidate of the future, someone who could unite the party and the nation, break free from the clutches of the past, and challenge the political status quo. The end was becoming inevitable. Hillary's campaign began to lose key endorsements, with many high-profile figures quietly switching their allegiance to Tulsi. The writing was on the wall, and it seemed that Hillary Clinton, after all these years, was finally being pushed aside. But in the backrooms of Washington, the fight wasn't over yet. As Tulsi continued to rise, Hillary's most loyal allies prepared one final attempt to derail her candidacy. They were about to make their move, but Tulsi wasn't just a political force anymore, she had become a movement, and movements were harder to stop than mere campaigns. As Tulsi Gabbard's rise continued, Hillary Clinton's allies scrambled to retain any semblance of control over the Democratic Party. Behind closed doors, a secret strategy meeting was underway, with some of the most powerful figures in politics working desperately to salvage the crumbling Clinton legacy. Hillary, though visibly defeated, refused to accept her fate. She had spent decades at the top of American politics, and the idea of being overtaken by a younger, more unconventional figure like Tulsi Gabbard was unbearable. She knew this was her last chance to shape the party's future, and she wasn't going to go down without a fight. "It's time to play the only card we have left," one of her top advisors said, glancing around the room at the small circle of loyalists. "We'll need to discredit Tulsi, completely. If we can't take her down on policy, we'll take her down on her character." The plan was set into motion with chilling efficiency. A series of well-placed leaks started to surface in the media, allegations about Tulsi's past connections, her political views, and even her personal life. The Clinton camp had gathered every piece of dirt they could find, hoping to tear down the image of the woman who was threatening to overshadow everything they had worked for. The media picked up the story like wildfire. Within days, Tulsi was facing a barrage of attacks. Headlines screamed about her questionable alliances and controversial past. Talking heads debated her every move, scrutinizing her every decision. The once unified front of her supporters now faced the uncomfortable reality of a smear campaign aimed at derailing her campaign. But what Hillary's team didn't count on was the resilience Tulsi had shown throughout her career. Tulsi knew the game they were playing. She had been in politics long enough to see when the knives were out. But rather than respond defensively, she did something unexpected: she addressed the allegations head-on. On a live-streamed broadcast, she looked directly into the camera and spoke to the American people. "These attacks are not about me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "They're about keeping things the way they are. This isn't about my past, it's about the fact that I am not beholden to anyone. I am not a puppet of the establishment. They know that if I'm elected, things will change, and they will lose their grip on power." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The attacks you're hearing aren't about my character, they're about fear. Fear of a future where the people have the power. Where we, the citizens, hold the keys to our own destiny. The message was simple, yet profound. Tulsi wasn't just defending herself, she was turning the attack on its head. The public, tired of the endless cycle of political games, responded with an outpouring of support. Social media exploded with hashtags like #TulsiTruth and #UniteForChange. The more they tried to discredit her, the more her base rallied around her. Hillary, however, wasn't giving up. In a desperate final attempt, she tried to pull the party back in line by securing last-minute endorsements from major Democratic figures. But it was clear, the establishment was losing its grip. The party's power brokers had underestimated the shift in the political landscape, and now it was too late to stop it. The final blow came when a series of high-profile endorsements poured in for Tulsi, veterans, activists, and even former Clinton supporters who were tired of the same old politics. It became clear that the tide had fully turned. The Democratic Party was no longer Hillary's to control, it had found its new leader in Tulsi Gabbard. In the days following the endorsements, Hillary Clinton gave her final public speech as a candidate. Her voice, once full of hope and confidence, now sounded tired and defeated. "The future of this country is uncertain," she said, "but I believe it's time for new leadership. I wish Tulsi Gabbard the best of luck in the future." It was over. The battle had been fought, and Hillary Clinton's reign had come to an end. The media erupted with the news: Tulsi Gabbard triumphs, Hillary Clinton concedes defeat. The end of an era. Tulsi had done what no one thought possible, she had toppled the titan of American politics, breaking through the establishment's chokehold and emerging as the leader of a new generation. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: America had just entered a new political era, and Tulsi Gabbard was leading the charge. With Hillary Clinton's concession and the media's overwhelming coverage of her defeat, Tulsi Gabbard's rise to political prominence became official. The atmosphere was electric as people across the country rallied behind her message of reform and change. What was once a quiet whisper in the political landscape was now a roaring wave, sweeping through the Democratic Party and beyond. Tulsi's campaign had struck a chord with Americans from all walks of life. The typical political divides, red versus blue, establishment versus outsider, suddenly seemed less relevant. Her focus on unity, independence from corporate donors, and a platform rooted in transparency resonated across the political spectrum. Tulsi was the new face of a movement that promised to disrupt the old order and create something that worked for the people, not the special interests. As the primaries approached, Tulsi's path to the nomination seemed clear. Her main rivals, while experienced and politically seasoned, lacked the kind of fervent grassroots support that Tulsi had cultivated. Her message was simple, yet powerful: it wasn't about winning for the sake of power, it was about winning to serve the people, to reshape the broken system, and to return the power to the hands of ordinary Americans. But as her lead grew, so did the attacks. The Republican Party, sensing the threat she posed, began to launch a full-scale counteroffensive. The narrative shifted from attacking her character to attacking her policies. The establishment of both major parties sought to find any crack in her armor. Yet Tulsi remained unfazed. She continued to campaign relentlessly, never deviating from her core message. "They can try to tear me down," she said at one of her rallies, "but what they don't understand is that I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this for you. For all of us who have been ignored and taken for granted for too long." Her unwavering resolve only made her more endearing to her supporters. Every time the media tried to paint her as too radical or too inexperienced, she used the attacks as fuel to ignite more passion within her base. Her speeches were electrifying, her presence commanding. It was clear that this was no ordinary election, it was a battle for the future of the country. But the battle was far from over. In the final stretch before the Democratic National Convention, Tulsi faced her toughest challenge yet: the Democratic Party itself. Behind closed doors, the party elite still harbored resentment for her defiance of Hillary Clinton. There were whispers of backroom deals, of attempts to manipulate the convention and deny Tulsi the nomination, even if it meant splitting the party. They believed that, despite her momentum, she was still too unpredictable, too unconventional to be a safe bet in the general election. But Tulsi was ready. She had anticipated these obstacles and was already making moves to secure the support of the grassroots activists and the undecided delegates. Every speech she gave, every interview she appeared in, she made sure to emphasize one thing above all else: this is not about one person. It's about all of us. As the convention loomed closer, Tulsi's team managed to secure enough delegate support to make her candidacy unstoppable. The party elite, realizing they had no other choice, reluctantly began to fall in line. By the time the convention began, Tulsi had secured the nomination in a dramatic, historic vote, a victory that would change the course of American politics forever. On the night of the Democratic National Convention, Tulsi Gabbard stood on stage, a microphone in her hand and the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The convention hall was filled with cheers, with people from all walks of life, representing a cross-section of the country that had rallied behind her vision. And as she began her acceptance speech, she knew this was just the beginning. "The road ahead won't be easy," Tulsi said, her voice steady but filled with passion. "There will be more challenges, more attacks, and more obstacles. But together, we will rise above it all. Together, we will create the change this country needs." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, and the media, ever watchful, could see that something monumental had just taken place. For the first time in a long while, the future seemed bright, full of possibility. Tulsi Gabbard had not only changed the course of the Democratic Party, she had sparked a movement that would redefine American politics for generations to come. And this time, it wasn't just about defeating one candidate or one party. It was about reshaping the very foundation of the system itself. The next chapter of America's story was about to be written. And Tulsi Gabbard was at the forefront of it all. The days following Tulsi Gabbard's historic nomination were a whirlwind of media appearances, interviews, and campaign events. The country was watching as Tulsi prepared for the general election. The Democratic Party, now united behind her, had rallied around the vision she had set forth. The future of American politics was no longer in the hands of the establishment, it was in the hands of the people. But the battle was far from over. As the election approached, the Republican Party intensified its attacks, determined to halt Tulsi's momentum at any cost. They played every card they had, attempting to paint her as too radical for the American mainstream, questioning her foreign policy experience, and even trying to sow doubt about her character. The ads came fast and furious, depicting her as a naive dreamer, someone unfit to lead the nation. But Tulsi, ever composed, never took the bait. She focused on the issues that mattered most to the American people: healthcare, economic inequality, climate change, and a government that worked for all, not just the wealthy elite. She spoke directly to the voters, telling them she understood their struggles because she had lived through them. She wasn't a politician bought and sold by corporate interests, she was one of them. Her rallies were massive. People came from across the country to see her speak, from small towns to big cities. Her message was simple, yet profound, a call for unity, transparency, and bold, transformative change. And then came the debate, the night that would change everything. It was Tulsi Gabbard versus the Republican nominee, a seasoned politician with years of experience. The stakes were high, and both candidates were prepared for a fiery showdown. The nation tuned in, waiting to see who would come out on top. The debate was intense. The Republican nominee, desperate to protect the status quo, tried to attack Tulsi on every front, questioning her policies, her ability to lead, and even her personal integrity. But Tulsi, with her calm and measured responses, dismantled each attack with surgical precision. When it was her turn, she spoke directly to the American people. "I don't have to tell you what's wrong with this country," she began, her voice steady but full of conviction. "You see it every day: rising healthcare costs, jobs disappearing, a broken political system that serves only the powerful. We can no longer afford to stick with the same politicians who have failed us time and time again. It's time for something different. It's time for a government that works for the people." Her words struck a chord, not just with her supporters but with many who had been skeptical of her candidacy. The debates were no longer about who had the best talking points or the slickest ads. It was about who truly understood the needs of the American people, and it was clear to many that Tulsi was that person. The polls reflected this newfound support. In the final weeks leading up to Election Day, Tulsi surged ahead. The gap between her and the Republican nominee closed dramatically, and soon, it became clear that the country was ready for a change. Election night arrived, and the tension was palpable. As the results began to come in, it was clear that Tulsi was on the verge of making history. The key battleground states that had once been out of reach were now turning blue, as voters across the nation cast their ballots for a future they could believe in. And then, it happened. Tulsi Gabbard, the woman who had once been underestimated by the political elite, had done the impossible. She had won. The nation erupted in celebration. People took to the streets in cities and towns, celebrating not just a victory, but the dawn of a new era in American politics. It wasn't just about a candidate, it was about the movement she had inspired. Tulsi had won, but so had the American people. They had reclaimed their voice, and they had chosen the future. In her victory speech, Tulsi stood before a sea of supporters, a smile on her face but a steely determination in her eyes. She was no longer just a candidate, she was the President-elect of the United States. "This victory is not mine," she said, her voice unwavering. "This victory is ours. It's the victory of every American who has been left behind by a system that cares more about the powerful than the people. Together, we will rebuild this nation. Together, we will create the change we've been waiting for." The crowd roared in approval. Tulsi's journey was complete, and with it, the promise of a new future for America had begun. As she stood on the stage, surrounded by the faces of hope and change, she knew one thing for sure: the real work was just beginning. But with the support of the American people behind her, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And so, Tulsi Gabbard's story became not just one of political triumph, but of the power of the people to shape their own destiny. It was the end of one era, and the beginning of another.